Welcome Wargamers to a series that I have meant to return to for some time. One that I call Why You Should Play Insert Factions. Today we're talking about the Orruk Warclans. Now I cover a lot of lore on the channel, as well as reviews of the Start Collecting boxes, which I'm going to restart doing as Vanguard boxes now that those are coming out. But when people are coming into the hobby, there's a lot of questions about, the value of certain things, how easy a faction is to get into, how hard they are to master or learn the rules for. All of that's in addition to really cool art and lore. And so these videos are intended to be a one-stop, larger, kind of broader picture of what a faction is like, simply highlighting how they fit into the three big pillars of the hobby, and that is, of course, lore, gaming, and hobby. Hobby being collecting and painting and that kind of stuff. And if you're not impressed with how they rank on any of these things, it's probably not a faction for you. But if you do like what they are in all three of those pillars, it might be the faction that you want to play. So let's do that exact same thing today for the Orruk Warclans. The Orruk Warclans is a catch-all term to describe the various types of orcs across the mortal realms. Now, keep in mind, it doesn't represent all of orcdom, for lack of a better word. There are countless smaller tribes of greenskins roaming around the realms, but the ones in this book are different in that they have a focus or an archetype, something that makes them stand out from a generic style orc and binds them together into a cohesive army, or as cohesive as an unruly mob of maniacs can be. So broadly speaking, those archetypes are the Ironjawz, the Bonesplitterz, and most recently, the Kruleboyz, who were added with the 3rd edition game set. Now, I will give a brief overview of each of these, but really quick, I want to highlight a few things that all orcs have in common. Firstly, they all in some way revere the twin-headed greenskin god of destruction, Gorkamorka, whose primal fury permeates every aspect of the Warclans' lives. Now, one thing to note about Gorkamorka is that he is a single entity that can divide into two personalities, Gork and Mark. Gork is brutal but cunning, representing pure martial might. He runs forward, he punches stuff up, whereas his brother Mork is cunning but brutal, so he focuses on tricksy forms of combat, ranged attacks, magic, setting traps, things like that. Some Warclans will revere one or both of the aspects of Gorkamorka, and they will build the mighty deeds of their deity into their mythos. So a lot of the sub-factions that you'll read about in this book have some tie, like we're doing this because Mork's toenail scraped across this mountain and now it's a religious site, and it's built into their whole worldview and religion and mythos. But every Warclan at least has some kind of reverence for him. There could be very different capacities, from religious zealots to, sort of ambivalent folks, but they all understand the idea of Gorkamorka. And oftentimes that's a great indicator as to what their culture or temperament is like. Again, martial focus, tricksy focus, that kind of thing. So with that being said, let's talk about these various archetypes. We're going to start with the Ironjawz, who are fiercely devoted to Gork. Again, he's the martial pride one. And as such, they are all about fighting and getting into the melee as aggressively as possible. And while they do lack subtlety, they make up for it in practical effectiveness. The core of the Ironjawz are the brutes. These are essentially orcs that have lived for an exceptionally long time. You see, as orcs live longer and fight more, they grow in stature and in might. Sort of like a form of indeterminate growth like we have here on Earth. These brutes will fashion crude plates of armor or mount on top of a giant Gorgrunta and charge headlong into battle. They're also led by a named character named Gordrak, who is sort of the Fist of Gork, a renowned leader within the Ironjawz and Orruk Warclans in general. Now, conversely to them are the devotees of Mork, that is, the Kruleboyz, and they excel at unparalleled destruction by conniving, backhanded, shadowy, and downright unfair means. Now, don't be misled, they aren't afraid of battle, far from it. But like a predator who likes to toy with their prey before the kill, the Kruleboyz find a lot of delight in breaking their enemies before delivering any kind of killing blow. So you'll see them use things like camouflage, ranged attacks, which again is very Mork-centered, poisons, hit and run attacks, deceptions, distractions, all these kinds of things. They even do chemical warfare at one point. They basically drop a bunch of acid on these people and make them all go insane against each other before the Kruleboyz ever rock up. And they leave their enemies scared, sick, and broken, and going mad from these psychoactive miasmas before endless cackles of laughter from the impenetrable woods turns into battle cries with a single charge. Cunning, but brutal. Now, if those two sub-factions make a spectrum, right, you got Ironjawz on one end, all punchy, nothing deceptive about them, to the Kruleboyz, who are all deception and kind of just more, I guess, hesitant when it comes to the upfront battle. Right in the middle of them, or I should say surrounding them, are the Bonesplitterz. These are orcs that come from every corner of the realms that went a little bit crazy. Basically, whenever orcs go to war of any kind, they get into sort of a battle trance. The power of the Waaagh, meaning their collective energy and enthusiasm about battle, courses through their veins and it unites them into a fierce war engine. And when the battle is over, they kind of cool off and they go back to normal. Well, sometimes something goes wrong in an orc's head and they get in that mode and they stay there, like they're stuck in full battle fever. So even among wild and hollering Orruk Warclans, these guys stand out as particularly kind of crazy, to the point where they're often kicked out of their war clans for being weird. It's just a guy who just like is amped to 11 constantly. And so these orcs alone will wander around with the thrum of battle drums in their heads, being drawn to the nearest Wargog prophet, a orc mystic that claims to see the will of Gorkamorka, and while I wouldn't say that they lead the Bonesplitterz, they seem to be able to at least direct them towards a target. They are premier beast hunters who see the essence of Gorkamorka in the bones of every monster that stalks the realms, and so these zealous devotees of Gorkamorka wander the realms, getting point to the next big hunt. Again, they're more of a religious type thing where they're trying specifically to honor Gorkamorka, whereas the others take on various aspects of them. And honorable mention, the last allegiance that you can do is called the Big Waaagh, which is simply all of these factions together combined. You get some bonuses, you lose some bonuses, but really what it means is that you can craft whatever specific type of war clan you want. Notable things about orcs from a lore perspective in terms of like why you should play them, they are everywhere. So there's never a narrative reason why orcs wouldn't be X. They're kind of everywhere. They also have some of the most fun character interactions and names and dialogue. They're just a lot of fun. Whenever orcs show up in a book, they're doing quite well. I'll also say that at the time of recording, we are in the era of the Beast, which features heavily in Gur, of which orcs run rampant all the time. So if you're looking for a character, or a faction rather, that's going to be narratively relevant for a while, this is a great one to choose. And also, even as the story moves on from Gur, they do spread out everywhere. There's enough narrative flexibility to have them be from anywhere, going anywhere, whether they're, Gorguntas charging across the fiery plains of Akshi, or they are, Icebone Bonesplitterz from the hearts of frozen mountains across the realm. All of those things are perfectly reasonable, so you can theme them to be from anywhere, headed any direction. So with the lore out of the way, let's talk about the actual hobby. This is going to be the nuts and bolts of collecting the army, painting it up, getting it ready for events, having it your collection match the cool fluff and lore that you just read about. And Orruk Warclans is a rather unique one, as mentioned before, because it contains 3 separate factions. You have your Kruleboyz, your Ironjawz, and your Bonesplitterz. And I guess the 4th option, the Big Waaagh, which is just whatever you. So I kind of want to tackle them each individually. The oldest, so that matters to some people, are going to be the Bonesplitterz. Those are your oldest sculpts. They used to be savage orcs back in Warhammer Fantasy Battles. Then not long into Age of Sigmar, the Ironjawz were released, which took the black orcs from Warhammer Fantasy Battles, kind of drew them up as Ard boys, and then added a whole bunch of really cool heroes and other units to their faction. And then most recently were the Kruleboyz, who are sort of this like sinewy, kind of lithe, all about guile and trickery. And all of this kind of development of what an orc is in the AOS setting is kind of interesting with this faction, because it really does give you a time capsule of like Games Workshop's ability to create cool models, right? You look at the Savage Orc ones, like, those are pretty good compared to some of the older, like stuff that's still in the Skaven line. Old models that they still kind of work, they're good models. And then you look at the Ironjawz, which was a huge showstopper when they dropped. And then you move into the Kruleboyz, which just have all kinds of mangy, nasty beasts and all these cool things. Like, you're really seeing the evolution of Games Workshop's design process get better and better. You may not like the aesthetics of the Kruleboyz, but from a technical standpoint of their models, they are actually quite amazing. And I say all of this because it's really hard hard to talk about Orruk Warclans as a singular thing because they do have this wide swath of miniatures that span 30 years or whatever. I don't know how old the actual savage orcs are, but you know what I mean? Like it's a considerable amount of time. What I can say though is that each of these lines, although they all work well together for Big Waaagh, if one really appeals to you, they are complete model lines in and of themselves. So for me, for example, I play Orruk Warclans, but I only play the Bonesplitterz side of things. So I have a lot of pigs, a lot of shamans and prophets and all these cool things. I really enjoy them. I even had a custom rogue idol made by a viewer of the channel. Thank you so much, Viridian Forge. So like there's some awesome stuff to be had in each of these individually. If you see one that you like, just lean really hard into it. And so when I'm looking at the strengths of this faction from a hobby perspective, we're talking about the pillars of the hobby, really I think the strength is a choose your own adventure type thing. You could develop individual armies for each of these sub-factions, Bonesplitterz, Ironjawz, Kruleboyz, and then throw them all together into Big Waaagh. You can have those paint schemes be reflective of their individual armies, or you can make them all somewhat cohesive so that when you do play a Big Waaagh, your entire army from all the different orcs is kind of the same color theme and that kind of thing. They all work together. One thing I do recommend is learning to paint multiple types of green skin. There's a lot of different kinds, from more of an olive type green like you might see like on camo patterns to a really dark intense green that I think Games Workshop uses a lot. Having that variety sprinkled in, no matter which sub-faction you go to, I think is going to add a lot of visual dynamicism, there's a word for you, to your army, make it stand out a lot more. And this is one of those factions, I kind of liken it to Cities of Sigmar, where the hobby project side of it can be as small or as big as you want. If you're like me, I like Bonesplitterz, I'm just going to paint a bunch of the same models because I want to have big units. They're all kind of a horde subtype within this army. So I just want to have like big, blocks of guys running forward and screaming. You can totally do that. If you wanted to have an elite army of just nothing but pigs, I just saw an all Gore Grunta list at, was it Vault Wars, and it did really good. And it was kind of fun to watch. Absolutely. Definitely moved a lot. And then, you can just kind of pick and choose whatever themes you want, lean into them, or you can go minutia and have like intricate stories of how all of these different leaders are having to work together and who's in charge of who, and you can do whatever you want. It's like I'm saying, the project and the collection and the narrative you build for it can be as easy as you want, as like big green guy in charge of Ironjawz win, or it could be this complex story of how all of these war clans are trying to respond together to the threats imposed by the forces of order, and you can reflect that in their models. Now, one thing I will add when it comes to the hobby aspect as far as getting into the faction, it's kind of a strange one, because as of the time of recording this, we do have a starter set that includes the Kruleboyz, so the Dominion, whatever that next tier down is. There's a bunch of starter sets that Games Workshop puts out that all have Kruleboyz in them. There's a great star collecting box for Ironjawz, gives you some Ardboys and some pigs, but there's absolutely nothing for Bonesplitterz. So if that's a part of the army that you want to lean into, you have to be aware of that. So each of these sub-factions, although they're distinct and they have their own cohesive model lines, they're not equally as easy to get into. The Kruleboyz are definitely the most accessible because you can grab a 2-player starter set, get your basic stuff if you want, probably go on eBay and grab a whole bunch more dudes for dirt cheap because there's always people selling off the other half of a starter set, and you can build a collection very efficiently and very cheaply if you'd like. So if you're going to start the army and you want to do all of it at some point, starting with Kruleboyz is probably not a bad idea. Then Ironjawz, and then pick and choose Bone Splitter parts as you want to add them to your Big Waaagh, and then once you have enough, then you can spin off and do its own thing. Again, that's only if you want to do all of it. If you know what you want, just go out and buy it. If you want to do Ironjawz, get a bunch of the star collecting boxes. You want to do Bonesplitterz, buy a bunch of those boxes. There's no starter set or discount for them, you just grab them. But what this means is the faction can be as easy to get into or as complicated as you want it to be, and that's awesome. Having control over how deep that you get as a hobbyist is really nice, because there's some factions that just don't work at small point levels, like for example Skaven. You have to have a lot of Skaven to play them, right? Like just a lot of stuff, and so you can't really feel the benefits of playing them until you have a lot of stuff. Whereas I feel like Orruk Warclans, the investment to see if you enjoy them is fairly minimal compared to other things, if nothing else, simply because they're included in the starter set, meaning their models are cheaper and more accessible. And so now we move into gaming, and I'm just going to preface right here, I am not a competitive guy. I'm talking about gaming from the standpoint of, does what you play on the table match the lore that you read about in the book, right? What is the word is verisimilitude, but basically, does it feel right? Do you feel like you're playing orcs? And I'm just going to say, yes, 1,000 times yes, more so than any other faction. For Ironjawz, they are the more aggressive melee version of orcs, or the most aggressive melee version of orcs, I should say. And their entire section of the book is about running forward and punching things really freaking hard. I can't overstate how fast they can move. They have out-of-sequence movements, like in the hero phase, they can make them move. They have a teleport spell, I believe, at least they used to, and then they can charge forward and just ram stuff like a huge block of Ardboys, which is tough to shift onto an objective very aggressively. If you want a dead simple army that does one thing, this is the one. Now, of course, that's an oversimplification. I do that, but there's a lot of nuance with how you can apply spells and Mystic Shield and how making sure you move your guys to cover objectives and stuff like that. But truthfully, if getting stuck into melee is your jam, this is the faction for you. It's like their trademark thing. Bonesplitterz are at sort of a rough place, you see, where the Ironjawz make up the bulk of their what they're pros, what they're good at by sheer melee might. Bonesplitterz rather are more about the horde. They are death by 1,000 paper cuts. And so the fact that they have 2 wounds, they have a 6-up ward that goes forever, and they can inflict some damage. Right now, I'll be perfectly honest, they're in a bit of a rough place. I think they need a little bit more support to be able to fight on par. Of the 3 sub-factions, or 4 I should say, they're probably the weakest, included Big Waaagh as number 4 there. They're probably the weakest in the book. I still enjoy them. But you have to understand that it's a very specific play style to get any use out of them, because they do die. However, they get a lot of bonuses on the charge and a lot of ways to get bonuses to your charge rolls. So you can definitely get them in turn 1 and start punching people in the face. This is going to be a faction for people who aggressively play towards the objectives. Movement is your thing. So movement onto objectives, trying to block and screen out your opponents. That's how you win games with Bonesplitterz. It's not going to be through killing the biggest thing. It's not going to be through, just absolutely smashing through your enemy's defenses. You just move to a place and die slow enough, hopefully, that you get all the VP you need before they overtake you. Keep in mind, that's not a glowing review, but it's by someone who absolutely loves his Bonesplitterz. And then there's the Kruleboyz that are somewhere in between. They do have some really cool ability to put mortal wounds out on people with their basic weapons, like poison-tipped weapons. But they also bring a ranged element to the faction that no other type of orc has. Sure, the Bonesplitterz have arrow boys, they're not that great, but the Kruleboyz have the man skewer bolts and all these kinds of things. They're really quite good. What I would say is they're a very tricksy army. They like to debuff their opponents. They like to swing above their weight class with lots of numbers, but once those numbers start to dwindle, they'll kind of fold a little bit. So you have to plan your attacks. Target priority is a big deal. Once you remove those, everything else considered an objective and just punch face. And then Big Waaagh is just a combination. You're rewarded for kind of sampling all the different kinds of orcs, and that's kind of its own beast, really. Get the book, check that out for its own review. But in truth, when it comes to the gaming side, not only is this a difficult faction to talk about because there's 4 allegiances within it, but also the sheer number of war scrolls. It is very easy to walk up. I say this about the Stormcast and the Cities of Sigmar book. Your eyes can just glaze over when you see all of the options you have to sift through. And so my suggestion for you for gaming is, once you've decided from the hobby perspective what sub-faction you want to focus into, even if it's Big Waaagh, doesn't matter, just really lean into the things that can take. So for me, it's Bonesplitterz. There's 9 war scrolls total. I like that. It kind of narrows my scope a little bit. Ironjawz, very simple war scrolls as well. Kruleboyz have a lot of options compared to the others, but even then, if you just focus on Kruleboyz, it helps a little bit. One of the things that I try to avoid when it comes to bringing new people into the game is that analysis paralysis of there's so many things I have to buy, there's so many things I have to try. It's no, just kind of narrow it down, pick a few things that you like, and from there, play some games, find out what works for you, what doesn't, how your brain works, what part of the game you enjoy, and then you can lean in from there. In this case, I would say pick up the starter set half of Kruleboyz, find out what things you like. If you liked doing melee fighting and that kind of thing, you might really like Ironjawz. Same goes for Bonesplitterz to an extent, but it's a different kind of melee. You can do all of that, so I would just say dip your toe in and then explore what appeals to you, because otherwise you're just gonna like get lost looking at this fat stack of War Scroll cards. Now, I always add this caveat at the end of these videos. If you are a Orruk Warclans player, and so am I, like I said, I only focus on the Bonesplitterz. That's what I can help with. If you're an Orruk Warclans player, specifically Kruleboyz focused or Ironjawz focused, leave me in the description down below or the comments down below what you suggest for people, because I always try to pin and promote the most helpful comments so people coming later finding this video have a chance to like see other people in the community's opinions. Tell me about how you would start with Ironjawz or the Kruleboyz specifically, and Big Waaagh if you've tried it. For those of you watching, go check out the comments. But more than anything, I hope that this video has been like a good example of why the orcs are so cool. Why should you play them? Because they do everything well, right? They have a huge model line to collect. They have fun lore that makes them available in any type of situation or circumstance. Like, orcs are just everywhere. That's kind of a general thing. The realms exist and also orcs. And then from a gaming perspective, the Ironjawz are incredibly good right now because they're so aggressive. Bonesplitterz are weak, but Kruleboyz and Big Waaagh make up some really interesting ways to play the game with cool rules interactions, and you can really throw your opponent for a loop. There's all kinds of fun things. It bangs on all cylinders, so to speak, and I love the Orruk Warclans. So thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you in my next video. Happy wargaming.